The aftermarket one, very expensive option. I think they're selling for like 125 bucks per corner. They're not locking nuts. If they do back off a little bit, or you have bearing failure or bearing wear in there, a little bit of play, you're really just relying on that tab. Hey folks, welcome back to the vlog. Ryan Wilson here from Predator Inc. So today we are launching a whole new segment of the channel. So we're gonna be launching tech tips throughout the month, probably one or two a month, going over unique aspects of the H1 Hummer and Humvee platform, as well as repair items on there to help out you, the viewer, as well as the community. Jumping into this, one of the most unique aspects of the H1 Hummer and Humvee, they're both very similar platforms, is the geared hub. So the geared hub is also called a portal axle, and what it does is, in essence, is has a couple gears in here, and you have an input shaft. We call it a half shaft. So the half shaft comes down from the differential, then it drops it down about 4 inches, and you've got the output over here. With that, you get to push up the entire drivetrain up about 4 inches. Great way to go for improved drivability off-road. If you take a look at like an H1 Hummer, Humvee, and even getting into another application that also has portal axles, which is a Mercedes G-Wagon, the 4x4 squared. It's a very unique truck as well. It has portal axles, just like the H1 Hummer with the geared hubs. If you look at that drivetrain, you don't see differentials hanging out down below like you would on a Jeep. So much improved off-road ability by pushing everything up high, protecting that drivetrain. So this is a very critical area. You really need to know that your spindle nuts are locked down, they're good to go. And we get into a lot of problems when non-authorized people are working on these things that don't know what they're doing, and they're not familiar with the H1 or Humvee platform, and they get in here and they don't run through the proper torque sequence, or they're using the wrong tools to tear this down. That's where it becomes dangerous. In addition to that, there's a lot of Humvees that are coming online from GovPlanet, and a lot of those have not been installed properly. So you really need to check that, especially if you have a Humvee. Make sure you have the right spindle nuts on there, that they are torqued down to the correct setting, and you're safe. So jumping into this, there are 3 OEM spindle nuts, as well as 1 aftermarket, so a total of 4. So I'm gonna take this one off. This is actually the H1 spindle nut. We'll talk about that in just a minute. We have the spindle right here, and this little keyway, if you can see that. And this is one of the original Humvee spindle nuts. You've got this washer, slides down on that keyway, and with all these tabs on here. And normally they're gonna be flat. These are kind of tabbed up right now, catching this little tabs, the slots in the nut. You can see it didn't work too well because we could just remove that without actually having to push them all down. We knocked down a couple of them and the rest of it just came up. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna tighten this guy down, and once it's tight, spin this around 5 times each way, and then you back this off to its required torque setting. Then you push these tabs up into place. This happens to be one of the first ones out there, and there's another variant too that actually has 4 little slots on here instead of 8 slots. So you can see they've been doubled up here on each area. Probably one of the worst ones out there. And the reason for that is these are not locking. They're just retained in place with this. So if this thing backs off at all, if it's not torqued down properly, it's gonna potentially wear this out. But in addition to that, these tabs that come up into here don't fully engage sometimes, and when they don't engage, they're not stopping this nut from backing off. Again, this is probably one of the worst designs. In addition to that is you need a specialized Kentmore tool to tighten this down properly. So this is where a shop that doesn't normally work on Humvees or Hummers gets into trouble, because they're looking at this going, okay, how do I get this thing off? And one of the go-tos is a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, and they tap it off. And when they go to put it back on, they do the same thing because they don't have the right tool, and they're probably unwilling to buy the right tool, which is right here. This happens to be a snap-on tool. There's also a Kentmore tool for some of these locking spindle nuts. Again, non-locking, you tighten it down and the tabs go up to kind of retain it in place. So this is one of the worst ones. In my opinion, if you have these get them off. So the next one is the Revision B Humvee spindle nut, and it is came out on the ECV platform. It's similar to the H1. I'm grabbing the H1. I apologize, I don't have one here. It is a true locking spindle nut. This guy has a slot in it that tightens down all the way around, so you have a full 360-degree grasp on the spindle shaft. This again is the H1. The Revision B is very similar in that the slot goes halfway across here, and it has 3 set screws that go down from the top and tighten it down, pinching it off on one half of the threads. So it is truly locking in place. And in that situation, you put your slotted washer in place, you tighten it down to the correct torque specs, and then you set the screws in here to the correct torque specs, and it's not coming off. That one is a true locking one. Great way to go. The other advantage to it over this, the H1 Humvee spindle nut, that it is a 6-sided nut. So you can use a standard socket on there, although it's gonna be a good size socket. The downside to it is it does not work in the H1 geared hub with CTIS. There's a steering arm cover that goes across here. It's gonna come in contact with that. However, you can get in there and grind that area out where it's gonna contact it and make it work. One option for you. The disadvantage is that it's only locking on half of it. It's pinching off on this nut on half of it. Now, we did chemical analysis on all the nuts here today. Revision B as well as the H1 nuts are a softer composition than the original Humvee nuts right here, as well as the Aftermarket nut right here. They went with a softer composition primarily so it can flex in and pinch off on the spindle shaft, which is a really good thing. Then finally going to the final OEM version is this guy right here. You can see the cut went all the way across through here, as well as about a third of the way down on the opposite side. And what that relief cut does down on the bottom side down here is it allows it to fully pinch off and come together, giving you full 360 degrees of locking on the spindle. In this application, very similar to all of them, you tighten it down, you set your bearings, and once all that's set, you back it off, you set your torque on there. We'll call this guy locked into place, right? Once it's tightened down, you come in and you tighten down the set screw. And you can see there's a little set screw right here. So once that guy is tight, then you come back in and you try to loosen this. You actually put a mark across the top and you try to loosen that spindle nut. You're gonna put 90 foot-pounds of force on there. This thing is set at 25 foot-pounds, so you're not overloading the bearing. Once that's set and torqued down properly, you come back in and push on it, pushing 90 foot-pounds of force on there. If there's any deviation, you've got a problem in here, you're best to throw away that nut as well as that little set screw. If it's done correctly, it will not back off and you fully tested it. Where this guy, the Humvee nut, is set at 25 foot-pounds, and there is no sequence to make sure it is locked in place because there is no locking feature to it. You put 90 foot-pounds of force on this guy, it's gonna back off a little bit. Now the tabs may or may not hold it in place, but it will loosen up. Eventually what's gonna happen is complete failure because those tabs are gonna wear out, the keyway is gonna wear out, and that pushes us into the final version, final spindle nut that we're gonna talk about today, and specifically how this failed. This is an aftermarket company that offers these locking spindle nuts, and there's a lot of hype as far as their locking spindle nuts. In reality, they're not locking spindle nuts at all. I would call them a retained spindle nut, but really nothing more than that. So we did a chemical analysis, that's why we're missing a section here. These are actually laser cut. Problem with laser cut is that there's a kerf to the laser and it downsizes it. So when you put this washer in place, you have about 45 thousandths of play. You can see all that movement. So see that right there? That movement that's happening is inside that little tab, that little keyway there. They're undersized from the OEM, with the OEM being larger in there. So you have a little slop in there, and that's key on this system's failure. So we're gonna go ahead and drop this washer in place. It's a tabbed washer. Then you take, it's just a standard nut, tightens down, you'll see this couple little notches in there. We'll get into that in just a second. So you tighten this thing down, and this thing eventually, once you seat the bearings, goes to 25 foot-pounds of torque. So once that happens, This little tabbed triangle washer goes on top. Now, I just was lucky I found that's the correct location here, but it falls down inside there. And then finally, take this retaining clip. So now that's locked into place. I did not torque this down, of course. So on here, I replaced the washer with the washer that failed on a customer's truck that came in. So it's locking spindle nut, which is not locking. It's advertised as being a locking spindle nut. It's really just kind of retained in place. What happens is when that tab fails, because you have so much slop in there, if this thing is not set properly or the bearings start to wear out, this nut is gonna start backing off. And when that happens, you have over, oh shoot, about 70 thousandths of play in there between the nut, this triangle washer, as well as the final tabbed washer. And you have all that play. What happens is it starts moving around, eventually eats up that little tab that's on the inside of the keyway here, holding it in place, and this happens. The whole thing backs off. So that is the failure on this. So now this is in line with the original humvee nuts. The advantage being is that you can put a wrench on, or a socket on this guy, no problem. But it's gonna fail too the same way. It's gonna give you a false sense of security, which is just not there, because eventually it will fail when that little tab right here fails. So when that gets eaten up, it's both shorter and also narrower. And so it just has all that slop and starts eating away itself. And eventually when it's gone, it's ground down, it falls off. This one, I would say, is slightly better than the factory Humvee. Not much so, because first off, you have that false sense of security that they're locked in place, you're good to go, they're never going anywhere, and they're not, because you're really just relying on that one tab that has a tremendous amount of slop to hold you in place. And this guy backs off and the whole assembly fails. Now, as you can see here, we've got this washer here completely spinning. So take a look at this guy right here. That is the tab that it's relying on to be held in place. So these bearings start to wear down a little bit. You have some issues in the bearing. If it's not installed properly, failure, complete failure. Where the factory Hummer, in my opinion, is the best one out there, has full 360 degrees of locking threads on there. So this thing pinches down and locks into place. It truly locks in place. It's not going anywhere. So if you have a little bearing slop, this guy is not coming off at all, because we've tested it, 90 foot-pounds of force trying to back it off. Again, the disadvantage here is you need this specialized tool to remove it. So that's its big downside there. So in summation, we've got the factory Humvee locking spindle nut, both the 4 slots on here, as well as on this one, the 8 slots. These guys need to come off. If you've got them on your Humvee, get rid of them. The aftermarket one, very expensive option. I think they're selling for like 125 bucks per corner. They're not locking nuts. If they do back off a little bit, or you have bearing failure or bearing wear in there, little bit of play, you're really just relying on that tab. So you're really just prolonging the inevitable, which is in line with this guy here, the factory Humvee one. Factory Humvee one, once it's loose, it's gonna back off pretty quick, where this guy is going to potentially stay on a little bit longer, maybe about the same, because the Humvee does have the little tabs in there holding it in place. So maybe it's a hair better, but it's really in line with the Humvee one. Then getting into the Revision B, which is a great way to go, but again, you cannot put it onto a H1 Hummer, because the H1 Hummer, the steering cover that goes across here won't fit unless you do a little bit of work. But the advantage with that one is once it's tight, then it is truly locking in place, but you can also use a standard wrench on it or socket on there. So great way to go there. Again, it's only pinching off on half of the shaft here, of half of the threads, so you're not getting the full lock. Now going to the factory one, which is right here, factory H1 Hummer part. They cost about 80 bucks per corner, so a lot less than $125 per corner. And that's with the washer as well as the set screw. And that one gives you a full 360-degree lock on it, really pinches off on the entire threads. There's also more threads on here. There's 9 threads versus the aftermarket one at I think about 7 threads. So you get a lot of bite on that shaft. You're also testing it at 90 foot-pounds of torque, trying to remove it. It's not going anywhere. That, in my opinion, is the best one out there. Disadvantage is everything comes with a price, right? You have to use a specialized tool. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it as always. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and more importantly, let us know what you think. Do you like this type of vlog? I know it's not gonna pertain to everyone out there watching it because they're probably not gonna be out there tightening their spindle nuts. Let us know what you think. If you like that, we can keep it going. If you wanna see more information on the Humvee, maybe some more history of the Humvee and the H1 Hummer, I'll be happy to bring that to you, so let us know. Thanks for watching, as always. See you guys soon.
Hey, what do they gotta do?
Hit the subscribe button down below. And then,
Oh, did you say that?
yeah, I fucking said it like,
I thought you just said.
I said, hey, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. But more importantly, let us know what you think. Comment down below and say, fucking guy, dude. Are you recording?
What?
You asshole?
Oh, yeah, I'm recording.
Dude.
Bye, Ryan.
On top of that, make sure. Dude, I'm gonna.